So, my friends, your appointment with any doctor starts and ends at the front desk as the office staff help you check in, make a new appointment, and do whatever paperwork you need. Yet they are often forgotten in the discussion about navigating the healthcare system. Today, we're changing that. Welcome to the Seated View. I'm Lena Anderson, and today I'm having a conversation with my friend and fellow rheumatoid arthritis advocate, Julia Chaco, who also has over 15 years, I was going to say minutes, it's a little more than that, 15 years experience in working for a rheumatologist. Welcome, Julia.
Hello, nice to be here.
Yeah, thank you for coming and sharing things. So today
Yes.
we're going to, it's going to be more a conversation because we're talking about both sides of the desk,
Mhm.
both what happens behind the desk, but also what you can do to, your experience, what you can do to kind of create that relationship with the office staff that can help you have a better experience in your doctor's office. So, but
Yeah.
first, let's talk a little bit about your background, Julia, both in terms of your RA and your work experience.
Okay. Yeah, my name is Julia Chaco, otherwise known as JG Chaco for advocacy and writing work. I am a writer, arthritis advocate, and actress living in Vancouver, British Columbia. And yes, I am a former healthcare worker with a rheumatology clinic, and I did that job for about 15 years. I am also a patient who has rheumatoid arthritis. So I think this is a really good conversation to have because I have both sides of the plate to look at, both perspectives. Yeah.
Excellent.
Yeah.
And you were diagnosed after you started working in a rheumatology clinic.
That's correct. So I was working in the clinic when I was diagnosed. So oddly enough, I was the last person to recognize that that's what was happening to me. It took my GP to actually go, oh, I think that we need to send you to a rheumatologist. And I was kind of like, oh, well, that's interesting. How about not the one I work for? Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it was during the time that I was working there full time that I was diagnosed with
Mhm.
that.
Mhm.
In later years, I moved to part-time work, but I still kept with the same work for a little while.
Okay.
Yes.
So before we get any further, we should just define the role and what it's called. In the U.S., it's called why don't you start? What is it called in Canada? The job you did.
Okay. So in Canada, one of the most common terms we call it is MOA, which means medical office assistant. Now, we can also be called clinical secretaries. We can also be called administrative secretaries. But basically, MOA is medical office assistant. And our job is to basically run the medical office, all aspects of it. So we do all the scheduling. We do the scheduling of patients, doctors, residents, and nurses. We answer phone calls. We get results. We send results. We book tests. We do faxing and filing of all reports. We clean the exam rooms. It's a whole whackload of stuff that we do behind the
Right.
desk.
So
Yeah.
basically, the definition of the role is other duties as assigned.
Yes. Yeah.
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 Okay. Anything and everything. I did a quick Google and found out that the role in the U.S. it's called clinical assistant or medical assistant or healthcare assistant,
Yeah.
but it's the same job.
It's the
And
same.
by the way, just want to say that we have a couple of people watching, and if you want to say hi in the comments, that'd be awesome because this is a conversation rather than just us lecturing. And if you want to share your experience, your frustrations, the good experiences, maybe you have questions about how to build that relationship, and maybe you're stuck. And Julia's here, hopefully, to answer everything and everything.
She'll
Uh,
do her best.
she'll do her best.
Yeah.
No pressure. And if you're watching this after we were live, you can also leave questions if you have any or your experiences. I'll be circling around the comment section and we'll keep an eye out. And if I can't answer, then I'm sure Julia can. So one of the things that can be frustrating, because as Julia said, you basically run the office.
Yeah.
And this is whether you're in a rheumatology office, your GP office, any specialist office, you run the office, which means you are the person in power. And it often means, often, the MOA, which is what we're going to call them, is excellent and really diligent, but sometimes they're not. So we're going to talk a
Yes.
little bit about our own frustrations, and then talk about how, and if you have any frustrations you want to share, by all means. And then we're going to talk about some of the ways we can kind of work around that. And I'm going to lead with the name I used to call the MOA in several doctors' offices. I called her the dragon. It was always a woman, and who was a dragon. Now, this was in the past. I think the different types of. I think the role is perceived differently now, but I've had RA for a long time, and in the past, it's very much seemed like the MOAs saw their job as keeping patients away from doctor. You know, doctor was always capitalized and never
Mhm.
the doctor or doctor, whatever the name is, but it was also always doctor. And trying to, and when you come in and go, well, this is a doctor I need to talk to in between appointments, and somebody who just was a wall in terms of actually access to your doctor. I think
Mm.
one of them I remember was terrible. And the problems I had communicating with her was actually one of the reasons I changed doctors. But it was just, I think the only time she actually did what I consider her job as in facilitating a between appointment conversation was when I had a really high fever and I scared the crap out of her essentially. And it was like, I am very sick. I have to see the doctor. And it's like, oh, okay, right? But I think in the past, especially, that was very much the experience. What about you, Julia? Have you had any dragons in your life?
Honestly, I haven't. And you know what? If I had a dragon, I probably didn't recognize them as a dragon. I think coming from that side of the desk, I understand why people behave the way they do sometimes.
Hmm.
Everybody can have a bad day. We're all human. I myself have not been completely innocent of being, like we can all have a bad day.
Have you been a
And it's
dragon
just
yourself?
it's possible I may have been a dragon in the past. Now it doesn't continue, and there's always apologies on both ends afterwards because there's usually something that just sort of tips you over the edge, and whether it's you
Yeah.
having a bad day. But the thing is I think even if you're having a bad day and you're maybe cutting somebody off a little bit or you're being a bit short with somebody, it's so easy to just recognize that in yourself and just go, oh, I apologize, blah,
Yeah.
I'm having a bad day, or I apologize, this isn't aimed at you, we so
Mhm.
as long as I think if you acknowledge it
Yeah.
and just make the patient understand it's not them, and most of
Hmm.
the time, 95% of the time, it is never the patient that is causing
No.
the issue behind the desk.
Yeah.
It could very well be the workload. It could very well be the day that, clinic days can be very stressful. They're very busy.
Yeah.
People are coming and going. People are in and out. You're dealing with your doctor, your nurse, your resident,
Hmm.
and the
Hmm.
patients all at the same
Hmm.
time, and you're
Yeah.
trying to juggle a lot of balls. So
Hmm.
sometimes, yeah, you can be a little short with patients, but it's never their fault. It's because you're just trying to keep the clinic together, really, as much as possible.
Yeah, and I
Yeah,
think we've all had those really stressful days um where one more thing, just a tiny thing can just set you off because
absolutely.
God knows I had one of those last week. So what would you suggest that say a patient can do in that situation if they've been snapped at? What is something that you can do as I guess as a person to just kind of reset that situation?
Yeah, I think that's a very tough question to answer because I'm very aware of when I have snapped at
Hmm.
somebody. And so immediately I will say, I'm sorry, this is not you. just take a seat and I'll deal with your question just a moment. Let me just finish what I'm doing. I think on the other end, yeah, I mean, the patient, they're, you know, I don't know what I'm trying to say here. I guess if for them it's just a matter of just being patient, maybe just take a seat. They could say something if they want. I mean, I can't say that I've ever been in a full out knockdown brawl with any patient. So, I mean, I think it's just being reasonable and just you yourself recognizing that maybe what you said or the way you said it may not have gone the right way, right? The patient could say something. I mean, I don't know what would you do as a patient? Like, would you say I didn't deserve that? Something like that. Like,
I
yeah,
think it depends on the situation. If it's a place
yeah,
I've been before, like as I try to bring my best self
yeah,
because I understand that, to be fair, I also understand that the more best I am, the more likely I am to connect with the person.
yes, yeah,
And I always start with, "Hi, how are you today?" And if I can see somebody looking tense, like even if they're looking at me and say, I might say, "How's your day?" Or if somebody snapped at me, it depends because often when we go to the doctor, we feel very vulnerable, maybe
mhm,
nervous. Um, and it takes a lot of having your walls up to let somebody snapping bounce off you or somebody not being their best self. I've been with people I know where I can kind of see they're stressed. I'll say having a bad day or a busy day or something like that. I think if somebody has been inappropriate, I would probably say, I didn't deserve that. I think that's a really good line because instead of it might catch someone, I think if someone is consistently badly behaved, I would report it to my doctor, quite frankly,
yeah,
because it's their
yeah,
office.
yeah. And
Now,
yeah.
mhm,
And I'm gonna say I'm hoping that most MOAs are not consistently bad behaved, but we will always
mhm,
have a moment. There will always be a
mhm,
time when maybe we just aren't at our best, and that could be for a
mhm,
million reasons, but it's never really about the patient.
mhm,
It's just, what's going on in the background, right? So
yeah,
I think it's absolutely appropriate for a patient to, like you very eloquently said, "Oh, busy day, having a bad
yeah,
day," and then that breaks the ice a little bit because then
yes,
we go, "Yeah, I am," and then we
yeah,
have a little,
yeah, and then
rapport,
that
right?
will, in most people, will lead to say, "Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, I am. Hi." Right? And it'll
Yeah,
bring them into the moment instead of being lost in the stress. I do
absolutely.
want to also say for those of you out there watching who are not MOAs, because we have Elisa in the comments who is here. Hang on, I'm just going to pop in and says she's interested in how we can improve the experience and accessibility for patient.
Yeah,
Kindness and compassion is so important to me on both sides, and that is very, very true. It's about. So this is going to be a long answer. I have a feeling this is going to be a long conversation. Um, I think I think it's important to remember, and we're going to get more into building that relationship later. But it's important to remember that as a patient, you are entitled to good customer service.
mhm,
You are a customer, and I think we forget that. I think people who are patients forget that, and I think medical staff often forget that it is a customer service experience.
it is.
So you are entitled to be treated with respect on both sides. We are
Yes, it's
both on
absolutely.
both sides. We are entitled to be treated with respect and dignity and be kept free of abuse or bullying. So that's important to remember.
Absolutely.
It's also important to remember on both sides of the desk that we're human
Yes,
and we may have a bad day or we may feel vulnerable or we may have worries that have come into the office with us. But at the bottom, and I say this as a frequent flyer in the medical system, that I think it's also important to remember that the MOA and other staff in your doctor's office are being paid to be professional.
Mhm.
Um, as a patient, I know I get better care, unfortunately, if I pay a lot of attention to managing the relationship. But I also think it's important as a patient to remember that the staff in the healthcare system are being paid to be professional.
That's true.
Like
I
it's
think,
a job, right?
yeah, people forget that the medical system is a business.
Yes.
Your medical office is a business first and
Mhm,
foremost, right? So
mhm,
absolutely, customer service is, the way to go.
yeah,
So, I mean, if people don't like the doctor, they're going to go to another doctor. They're going to take their business elsewhere, so to speak,
yeah.
right? So it is a business, and so you have to be, as a MOA, I usually, when patients come in the front door, I usually say hello. I greet them. I ask
Mhm,
them how they are, and then
mhm,
usually they'll take a seat and wait for the doctor.
mhm,
Sometimes there'll be conversations back and forth.
mhm.
I think if you establish a really good rapport with your front desk
Yeah.
person when you come in, there's going to be a little bit of conversation while you're waiting. There might be some joking around. There might be,
Mhm.
I think it really is about making the patient feel at ease. That
Well,
they're,
yes, and I
yeah,
think, like I said, that is very much part of the job because you understand that this person is worried and they're not
yeah.
feeling well, right? And I think so. We have gotten. I have I have questions. I have a
Yes.
list.
Okay. Well,
We have a flow, and we hopped straight to the end. Well,
okay.
the second part of this, which we will touch on more, but we're going to go rigidly back to my list.
Yeah.
But I kind of like that this just became no, let's go here. So, um, and I think it's like the like just to put a pause on this, like the basis is remembering that we're all people. Both
Yes.
sides of the desk are people. Both sides of the desk is about trying to just be a person, you know.
Yeah.
Um, so let's go behind the scenes
Mhm.
and talk about what are some of the things you do as an MOA because you do more than make appointments, obviously.
Well, yeah,
Uh,
there's a lot that goes on to running the clinic and running the office. So I mean, our the most basic functions that we do as an MOA obviously are answer the patient phone calls. Um, we book the patients into the clinic, but not only do we book patients into the clinic, but we're actually booking the doctor himself into the clinic. This was my job. Now, every office is a little bit different, but how I ran it was I would book the doctor. I would book the nurse that we work with. I would book the residents that we work with because we will have medical students and residents coming in who are future rheumatologists in training, and this is their teaching, right? So
mm,
it's a lot of juggling, not just with the patients, but with the doctor, with the nurse, with the residents. And
mm,
you often have in a clinic day, you often have, you know, 4 or 5 patients coming in all at the same time and going to all these different rooms, right? And they're off into different rooms. So you're juggling the
mm,
rooms, you're juggling where everybody is.
mm,
During a clinic day, I'll be helping the doctors and the nurses find results that we don't have. So we have to
mm,
go, I may have to call the hospital and get them to fax it over, call the lab, get them to send it over. Um, so there's a lot of stuff just going on in the middle of the clinic at the same time, right? The phones are probably, during a clinic day, the phones are probably the last priority
mm,
because you're dealing with patient right in front of you, you're explaining their tests to them, the doctor's telling you what they want booked. So, that's why there's a messaging system on the phone and you
mm,
leave a message and we will call you back as
mm,
soon as we have the time to do it. Now, sometimes
mm,
on a clinic day, we may not be able to get back to you until the next day. So you just have
mm,
to understand that that's not us ignoring you, that's us trying to get through our clinic and finish it off. And then the next day, when there is no clinic, then we have time to do the
yeah,
emails, the phone calls, the returns, the
yeah,
questions, all of that
yeah.
stuff, right?
Okay.
So there's a lot that goes on at any given time in the
Mm,
office. And I was the only one running the office. Many offices have 2 or 3 MOAs working because they're bigger offices.
Mhm.
But I was only a part-time MOA. My rheumatologist only did a part-time clinic 1 day a week, but still I was the only person doing all of these things. So
Mhm.
sometimes it was a lot of work, right?
Well, and you
Yeah.
were usually, just remind me, so you had a clinic day once a week, and you were usually working, what, 3 days a week?
I was working about 3 days a week. So the doctor is not in the clinic every day. And this we might be jumping ahead to this another question, who knows?
That's
But
fine. This is this is loose.
I think what people really misunderstand is, yeah, the secretary is there, but the doctor is not there always at
Yeah.
the same time as the secretary. So the
Mhm.
secretary will answer the phone. You have a question for the doctor, and somebody will say, "Well, can I speak to him?" And I'll say, "Well, he's not in the office today, so we can either send him a message via email, or
Mhm.
I can set up a phone call with you on his next clinic day." Right.
Mhm.
And when the doctor's not in the office, they're not out on the golf course. And that's the other thing, is that when they're not in the office, they are doing rounds at the hospital, and
Mhm.
they are teaching. They are
Mhm.
reviewing results. There's on call at the hospital where they're actually working on call as the on call doctor in the hospital. And in the case of my rheumatologist, he was also a full time research scientist. So he's
Mhm.
doing the research, that
Mhm.
helps us live better lives with
Mhm.
arthritis. So the doctors aren't always there. So when you call in with a question, be aware that it could take a couple days to get the answer back.
Mhm.
And.
And we're going to get back to the having a question for your doctor shortly. So we're going to
Yes.
loop back to that. But I also want to just point out, as Julia said, she was working three days a week. One of them was a clinic day, which meant you have 2 full days a week where you are doing other things,
Yeah.
which tells you just how much goes on behind the scenes, because you're not just
Yeah.
sitting there and you're not just running a clinic, but there's a lead up to the clinic, there's follow up after the clinic.
Yeah.
Um, so let's kind of start at the beginning of, like, we're talking specific rheumatology, but this can be generalized to a lot of offices.
Mhm.
But because we're talking about rheumatologists, so what's involved, for instance, in a new referral for people who are
Okay.
whose
So,
doctor said, we may want to send you to a rheumatologist.
okay. So this is a new referral coming into our office,
Yeah.
correct? Okay.
Mhm.
So usually what happens is your GP will send in your general practitioner, or family doctor will write a letter to the specialist outlining what they suspect.
Mhm.
And then they will, hopefully, if they're a really good family practitioner, they will send you for some preliminary tests prior to you coming to see us. So they may give you a standard blood test just to check for inflammation in your blood. They
Mhm.
may send you for x-rays if you're experiencing issues in certain joints.
Mhm.
And I would say, please do those tests, because often we will wait for those tests to come in before we book you, because in that way we have a well-rounded picture of what is happening before you even come in the door. And then you come in, and the first appointment is always a longer appointment,
Mhm.
and we will do a full-on exam, and the doctor will ask you questions about your history and then recommend either further treatment or further tests to really unravel what is going on. Um, so, in terms of referrals coming to us, we usually review them for what we think and protocol them in terms of urgency. So, for
Mhm.
example, anything that we see as a potential inflammatory arthritis, such as rheumatoid or
Mhm.
psoriatic or something that is damaging to the joints, we will get
Yeah.
you in faster, sooner
Mhm.
than, say, somebody who has, a general ache in their back, or,
Mhm.
and there's no inflammatory markers, right?
Mhm.
So it really is about catching the most urgent patients and getting them in first and getting them established on treatment. Now, what you can do if you're waiting for the appointment from the rheumatologist, you can call them and ask to be put on a cancellation list. And we will do that. And we will happily
Mhm.
do that. And I have many times the day before clinic had a cancellation where I've called somebody else and said, hey, this just opened up tomorrow. It's yours
Yeah.
if you want it, right?
Yeah.
And you just call and you just politely ask, I'm on a way, my doctor referred me, can I be put on a cancellation list? And would be sure, absolutely. I always try to, you may have heard this on answering machines. When you call into the doctor's office, sometimes the machine says, please don't leave multiple messages.
Mhm.
Now, my machine never said that, but I just always hoped that people wouldn't, because the more messages you leave, the more time it takes me to keep checking those messages, and the longer it takes for me to get back to you.
Well,
So
and I
just
think, yeah, I think one of the good things about what I've noticed increasingly when for my specialist, that they will say messages will be returned within 24, 48 hours. If your
yeah,
matter is urgent, go here, right?
yes,
And
yeah,
I think it's about managing your expectations. And if your doctor's office doesn't say that, assume that's the case. But I also think it's important to mention, as you and I talked about that, or you mentioned in the essay that we're basing this on, we both wrote about this, both sides of the desk from for creaky joints, and I'll pop those in the comment section after we were live. But you also say that if you have worsening of symptoms while you're waiting for your first appointment, do not don't just sit there and suffer through it. Go to an urgent care, go to your GP, go
yeah,
to somewhere and ask them
yeah,
to send a summary of that appointment to the rheumatologist you've been
yeah,
referred to, because that might mean that you get higher up the list if they see,
yeah,
oh, that person is worse now and this doesn't look good, so we're going to get them in faster.
yeah.
You
Absolutely.
all,
So
mhm,
yeah. So certainly if you're after you've seen your GP and they've sent in the referral and now you're waiting, if you are exactly, if you are getting worsening symptoms, if things are getting bad, go back to your GP. Have
mhm,
them look at, reevaluate you again, write it down. Or if you can't get into the GP, which is often a problem here in Canada sometimes, go to the urgent care center and just get evaluated.
mhm,
Hopefully your family doctor can provide you with some pain relief while you're waiting,
mhm.
right? So, but you have to be communicative with them. You can't
Yeah,
just sit back and wonder when you're ever going to get called and sit there and suffer. Don't sit there and suffer.
yeah,
You know,
yeah,
Pick up the phone again and go, okay, things are getting worse.
yeah,
And then you can phone the rheumatology office and say, can I please be on a cancellation list? And,
yeah.
you know,
And
yeah,
I think and this is also the important point, that to realize that your MOA is your champion, that you don't just call and say, I need to see the doctor sooner. You would call and say, this is why I'm worse. I had to do this. I can't work. I'm
yeah,
in danger of losing my job. Like, you explain the impact your symptoms have on your life, because especially if they're worse, because that might mean that you'll get triaged differently. That
yes,
if it's somebody who's like, I remember a story, I talked to someone I used to know who was waiting for a knee replacement, and in Canada that wait is long. um,
yes,
Often, and at some point, like after having waited a year, she just kind of, like, it just by coincidence mentioned to her doctors, like, yeah, I had to set up a bed on the ground floor of my house because I can't get up the stairs. And he immediately said, oh my God, why didn't you tell me this?
yeah,
And that meant the triage was much different because
yeah,
of the impact of the life. If you can't go
yeah,
upstairs, then guess what? You're an emergency.
yeah,
Um, I also just want to touch real quick on something you told me once about when you get an appointment early in the morning and you say, as somebody with rheumatologist said, I can't function to
yeah,
get there at 8. What is your advice then?
yeah. So we had a very limited clinic, and our new patients were always first thing in the morning because they were the longest appointments of the day. So our new
Mhm,
patients were probably about 90 minutes. So you're getting a 90-minute appointment to go over everything to find out so that we can find out what's going on, right?
yeah,
Um, And yeah, it's tough when you have arthritis to
mhm,
have an 8 a.m. appointment or a morning appointment. But the thing is as difficult as it is, usually it's just the one time that you have to do it because of the length of time. right? We've set aside all of that time for you. But the second thing is we need to see you at your worst. We
Mhm.
really do.
Yeah.
Like, if you come in the afternoon and you're feeling 100% better than you were in the morning, we can't see that. The rheumatologist
Mhm.
can't see it. We can't see how swollen your joints are. And
Mhm.
this happens. You can get up in the morning and feel crappy for about an hour, and then 3
Mhm.
hours later, you're doing way better, right?
Mhm.
Your swelling has
Yeah.
gone down, your stiffness has gone away, and now we
Mhm.
can't see that if you come into the office.
Yeah.
So I always tell I started to tell patients, look, I know it's rough, I know it's hard. Do it this one time. We need to see
Mm.
how bad you are.
Yeah. And
Let's
I think
see.
that's,
Yeah,
yeah, and I think that's really important because there's also that phenomenon that we all kind of tend to lie a little to our doctors when they say how you've been doing. It's like, no, I'm much better, right? And it's like not true. So, but for me, I liken it to putting up walls. That in the morning I'm really raw and vulnerable because I hurt, and I'm.
yeah,
But talk to me 2 hours into after I got up, and all the walls are up, and I'm coping with a capital C,
yeah,
and my doctor needs to see me without the walls.
yes,
Because those are the times when it's really bad that you might cry in the appointment, and I know we don't like that, but it's not always a bad thing because it shows how desperate you are, right?
absolutely. It's
I
important. It's important for the doctor to see you at your worst
Yeah,
because, then we can really have an understanding of what we're diagnosing. What
yeah,
kind of arthritis is this, and how
yeah,
do we, and now let's implement some tests and treatment and get going, right?
yeah. I also want to talk about one of the insurance. Now I know MOAs in the U.S. they often have more involvement with insurance because there's endless documentation, etc. And that's less so here in Canada because insurance tends to be involved in paying for treatment, but not the actual medical visits.
That's right.
But and if you've just talked to a few people in the U.S., especially, we know that the random decisions by insurance companies, no, we don't want to cover the medication, we don't want to do this, and I know people who spend hours a month every month on this. But the insurance game can also be really frustrating from your end, and you have a fun story about that.
Yeah, the insurance game is frustrating on both ends. It's frustrating for patients and it's frustrating for the medical office because it takes so much time. And, part of that is the insurance company, has a ton of ridiculous questions that just so many of them are unnecessary to the point of why we're prescribing this medication.
Yeah.
And it does take up a lot of time for the doctors. So I always say if you have to bring in insurance forms in Canada anyway, could be in the States. I don't know quite how it works in the States, but in Canada, if you have to bring in insurance forms to cover to do extra coverage on medication or biologic,
Mhm.
get those forms in there as soon as you can and expect that's going to take a couple of weeks for those forms to be done. Okay, because we have a lot of forms coming in, and like I said, the doctor's not in the office every day, so he'll come in and do the paperwork on other days. So just be aware, just try to get those forms in sooner rather than last minute.
Mhm.
And in Canada, and I don't know if, about the States, but in Canada, while we're waiting for coverage from the insurance, you can register with the patient support program through the pharmaceutical company themselves. And they,
Especially for biologic, I should mention that
especially for
it's a
biologic, and yeah,
biologics.
and they will bridge you. They will cover you that cost until such time that your insurance papers are filled out. So there are options there. And yes, for filling out the insurance forms constantly for the doctors is a real pain in the butt
Mhm.
because it's almost like the insurance companies question the doctor, and it's almost
Mhm.
at the same time where you're sitting there going, "Did you go to medical school for 10 years?
Mhm.
No, you did not," right? So the really funny story I have is one day my doctor was quite frustrated with one of the insurance forms that he had to fill out because, you know, they're basically asking the question, Why did you prescribe this medication for your patient? Well, if you've checked all the other answers and if you looked at the documentation, you know why. So he got pretty fed up with that one and just wrote, because I said so.
I love that. I
Yeah,
love
because
that.
it's frustrating for the doctors. It's so much paperwork that could
Yeah.
really be cut down, but
Mhm.
insurance companies don't want to make it that easy. So, you know.
Mm. Well, and I think one of the things that helped me, and I think when you do, just before I go on, you mentioned forms like expected it's going to take a while, and the same goes for prescriptions. I think one of
Yeah,
Julia's go-to recommendations is to keep track of how many repeats on your prescription, and when
absolutely.
you fill the last one, that's when you call or you get your
Yes.
pharmacy to fax at that moment, not when you come to pick it up the
Yeah.
next
Yeah.
prescription, so that your
Yeah.
doctor has about a month to write it.
Yeah. So
And that way, if they're on vacation or whatever, then you're not going to be stuck.
yeah, exactly. Don't wait until you have the last pill in your bottle
Yeah,
to call the doctor for the renewal. Okay.
yeah.
Because yes, the doctor could be on vacation. The doctor may not be in the office for the next 3 days. So these things won't happen right away. So on your prescription bottle, it should tell you how many refills you have and just keep track of that. Make
Mhm,
sure that you're not going to get stuck without medication and that you're going
mhm,
to, run out. Now, if that happens, and you are stuck and you have let it get to this one last pill and you're desperate for medication, you can talk to your pharmacy.
mhm,
Most pharmacies in Canada, perhaps in the States, but most pharmacies in Canada, if you go to them and ask for an emergency supply, until you can talk to your doctor, they will oblige. So they may give
mhm,
you an extra couple weeks or an extra month to get you through until you can get the renewal from your family
mhm,
doctor. So the pharmacists are a great resource to go to if you're
mhm.
absolutely stuck, right?
Also important to remember, this does not go for opiates on either side of the border likely, but it will go for things like methotrexate or a biologic or an anti-inflammatory and things like
Yeah.
that, but not for any controlled
No. So
substances.
things that you have been on for a while, things that are your regular medication and the pharmacy can go on and see that this is a constant medication for you. It's easy enough to give an
Yeah,
emergency supply because they
mhm,
see that you're on this
yeah,
medication. If it's brand spanking new, they may not do it just because
mhm.
at this point
It's
we're still
new.
monitoring it's new.
Yeah.
But if you've had this in your history for months and months and months and months and months, it's
Mhm.
usually no issue for them to give you an emergency supply. And then just make sure you're either in contact with your doctor by appointment or by phone, right?
Mhm. Yeah, and I think like it's a good habit to every time you bring your medication home, you take it out of the bag to put it where it belongs. Just check the label, look at how many refills are left. If it's only
Yeah.
one, that's when you take
Yeah.
action. That
Yeah.
exact moment you put it away, you call the pharmacy. Like here, I call my pharmacy and they fax a renewal form,
Yeah.
and and then you have 30 days for all kinds of bumps to happen, whether
Exactly. Yeah.
it's doctors on vacation, whether it's that your insurance company is all of a sudden going, nah, we don't feel like this.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which brings me back to my point about insurance, which is once I realized rather that the insurance companies mandate is to make money.
Hmm.
It is not a mandate to pay out of my policy. Well, it is. They have an agreement, but they will try to reduce that. Some, especially in the States, I think will try to extend that cost. And like once I understood that that they have a corporate mission,
They do. Yeah.
then I stopped taking it personally, and it changed the name of the game for me. That in the sense that now I understand that I need to know my policy, I need to know the right people to talk to at my insurance company. I need to know when to escalate beyond the agent who answered the phones, and I escalate much faster now. And I've also argued with my insurance company. I remember once um, they refused to cover my naturopath without a prescription from my doctor.
Mm.
And I escalated to a supervisor. I had a long conversation where I said, I don't need a doctor's referral to get a naturopath.
Yeah.
So no, you don't get, because they're basically trying to avoid pre-existing treating for or paying for pre-existing conditions.
Yeah.
So in the end, it was like I basically said, anything I can self-refer to, you can't use that argument. And then all I needed was, in the end, the letter from my naturopath saying why she was treating me.
Yeah.
But I think it's having that awareness of insurance companies will sometimes, alas, try to avoid paying as much as possible.
Yeah.
And it just means being very aware of how to interact and what you can do and what your rights
Yeah.
are, and basically escalate.
Yeah.
So
I
we
would,
are getting, sorry, go ahead.
yeah, I was just going to say, just know your insurance policy. Know
Yeah.
it. Know what it covers, know what you
Mhm.
need to do to get the coverage. And
Yeah.
that makes the job of us filling out your insurance forms so much easier,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Let's talk about tips to get the best experience, which we've already sort of chatted about. And just a reminder, if you have any questions or want to share your experience, just drop it in the comment section.
Yeah.
Um, so understanding, and this is why we spent so long on what's happening behind the scenes, because understanding that there's a lot of work involved, and that many doctors have, like, I think my rheumatologist at one point told me she had 600 patients. That's a lot of people to keep track of, but it can help you manage your expectations, so the things you can do to maximize it, like, maximize your experience, and always act ahead unless it's a true emergency. Um, but we talked a little bit about the overwhelm of the position, and how stressful it can be, and how many balls you're juggling, essentially. Um, Talk to me about the burnout and the pandemic.
Oh yeah. Well, that was just difficult all around for both staff and patients. So, with during the pandemic, I think the um, it was really, we didn't know what we were dealing with. So I worked at home for about 2 months. That was it. After 2 months,
Mm,
I was back in the office, right? And the stress is there because we still have to see some patients in person because you
mhm,
cannot you cannot examine somebody over Zoom. you know there's lots of things that can be done via telehealth, but if you
yeah.
really need to see the person and examine them, they need to come in person. And that was
Mhm,
difficult because it was patients didn't want to come in person, and I understood they were scared.
mhm,
Having patients come into the office was stressful too, because we're trying to stay healthy as well, because if we're
mhm,
not healthy, no one's looking after you, right?
mhm,
So I mean, it was a lot of trying to figure out, well, how do we approach this and still give people the care they need, but try to avoid us getting sick. So
mhm,
there's all these protocols that you put into the office, right? And then it was just a lot more work, because now people were not only phoning in about their disease that we treated, but they were phoning in about COVID, and that
mhm,
kind of blew up the whole medical experience, because it's like, we know about as much about COVID as you do at this point, right?
mhm,
So as the months go on, we would learn more and more things. But my doctor, particularly the rheumatologist particularly, isn't a COVID expert
mhm,
by any means, right?
mhm,
So it got very, yeah, it was a difficult time. And then there were people who would come to the office because they wanted to be seen in person, but they didn't want to wear a mask,
mhm,
right? And now I believe now most places are not masking, but at that time we were masking, and we were masking religiously, and it
mhm,
it got it got difficult to have to argue with people.
mhm,
And because you would say to them, please wear a mask when you come, and they would say, oh, do I have to? And I'd be like, yes, you do. Or they'd come to the door and they didn't have a mask, so we would provide them one. And I basically had to say to people, you don't have a mask, you don't come in.
Mhm.
because it's not really about, if you make the doctor who's treating you sick, no one's
Mhm.
going to treat you. You're
Well,
stuck. You're
and
gone. You know.
it's one of
Yeah.
those things that, like, at that stage you knew that you were protecting others as well. But I remember when you first said that, and I thought that's a really good way of saying it. If you come to the office sick, you're going to make the people who care for you and maybe 600 other patients, you're going to make them sick, and you're going
Yeah.
to interfere in your own care and in the care of others,
Yeah.
which is why I argue that we should kind of take a hint from Asia, where people, when people are sick, they wear a mask to protect the community. And
Yeah.
like, I'm lucky in, like, the hospital that my doctors are associated with, they have just announced, and many others in Toronto have just announced, that they're removing the mask mandate from staff only areas, which I think is short sighted, because apparently vulnerable people don't work for hospitals, but whatever.
Apparently not.
But all other areas where there may be patients, the masks are mandatory. And I
Yeah.
think, and I think it's something to keep considering, that if
Yeah.
you're sick, and often we will go to a doctor when we're sick, wear a mask, because there's other
Yeah.
people in the waiting room.
Yeah.
There's your doctor and their staff, the nurses, their MRAs, and it can have a catastrophic effect
Yeah.
if you make them sick, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's important. Would you say that there's still burnout? Like, we don't hear about burnout so much, but
I think there is, because COVID caused a backlog. So COVID caused a lot of backlog, and in our clinic, it was, doing the telehealth medicine was actually more work than
Mhm,
doing it in person.
mhm,
There was a lot more screen time, there was a lot
mhm,
more paperwork, you know,
mhm,
clinics that, would really, like, I would be able to run a clinic in person on a day, and by the end of the day, I would have done everything for those patients at the end of the day.
mhm,
But
mhm,
on Zoom, on telehealth, I that work spilled over into the next day,
mhm,
because there was just more work to do. So yeah, and I think burnout's still happening now, because people, you know, something happened during the pandemic, where people, I don't know if they're suffering a little bit of anxiety or PTSD, but there's a lot of impatience and a lot of
mhm,
anger. And they
mhm.
tend to bring that with them into the offices, and that isn't going to get them very far. At least it wouldn't with me.
Yeah. This
You
is when
know,
she turns into a dragon.
this is when I turn into a dragon, because it's like, you know what? I will bend over backwards and do anything for you if you come to me with a, genuine respect and just a question, and just, I need help, and be polite and be respectful. But if you come in demanding and yelling and getting all, you're not going to get very far in
Mhm,
that
mhm,
vein. We deal with a lot of people in any given clinic day,
mhm,
and it's a lot of energy that's flying around that room, whether it's coming from you or from
mhm,
the patients. So
mhm,
it can be very stressful to try to keep everybody calm, and kind of keep everybody,
mhm.
it's like, it's gonna be okay,
Yeah.
It's like you're
Well, and
petting.
and
Yeah.
it's that's a lot of staying calm in stressful situations, when you have to not just manage your own mood, but also the entire waiting room.
Yeah.
Um,
It's
so before we pop on, and now we're getting to the creating the relationship. Just want to say hi to
Mhm.
mom. Everybody say hi to my mother.
Hello, mother.
And anybody out there, say hi in the comments. If you have an experience or question, please pop it in. If that sounded possibly rude, please leave it in the comments section.
Leave
Um,
it.
yeah, and I think we go back to, like, what we talked about initially, is remembering that everybody is a person. And I have at times been frustrated, whether it's in a medical setting or something. It's or anywhere else, where I've had a bit of a rant, and once I can feel myself getting started and the person going, okay, then I will say, it's not you. This is not personal. I'm sorry, but I'm really frustrated because X, Y, and Z.
Mhm.
That calms me down. I still have a legit reason to be frustrated, but it's important to remember that the person in front of you is there to help you resolve the situation, not
Yeah.
and alienating them is not going to help.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean that you can't have emotions, but be try to reduce the fire within
Yeah.
and save that really energetic rant for your spouse, your friends, whatever,
Yeah.
or online, without mentioning names, but try to work with the person in front of you because we get back to as an MOA, you're the boss and you manage access to the doctor, which again doesn't mean that as a patient you should take inappropriate behavior, but you're going to get, as in any situation, much further with honey than with vinegar.
Yeah.
Which doesn't
I
mean you should you know what, a certain body part, but it does mean let's get back to talking about building that
yeah.
relationship.
Well, I think you hit the nail on the head exactly when you said when you talked about you came in and you were on a rant and then you say, "I'm sorry, this is not about you."
Yeah.
And I think because we're all human and we're all going to
Mhm.
get frustrated and we're all going to have our bad days, but as long
Mhm.
as we acknowledge that, like, and exactly what you did, I'm sorry, I'm frustrated, and here's why. And
Yeah.
that goes a long way in me being able to understand what's happening with you,
Yeah.
and vice versa, right? So, like
Mhm.
I mean, I very rarely snap at people. But
Mhm.
there were times when I may have been short just because maybe I was doing something on the computer when they were talking to me and I
Yeah.
couldn't split my attention, right?
Yeah.
And then I usually just try to remember, okay, I'm just going to let this person know,
Mhm.
just give me a minute and then I'll be right with you. And then you
Yeah.
have my full attention, but let me just finish what's going on here, right? It's being aware of how you react and
Yeah.
why. Yeah, and why
Well,
is the
and
big
I
question.
yeah.
Yeah,
Well, and I also think it's important as a patient to see if somebody's busy, just kind of go, hi, and
yeah,
somebody will probably put on some fingers, I'll be there shortly. Now, if
yeah,
that person is still after about 3 minutes not acknowledging you in any form, then you can kind of be a little more insistent because trust me, I have a current office where there's not a lot of responding to patients.
mm,
Um, but I also think it's like as you get to know the person.
yeah,
I have one doctor where I know that the front desk person can seem quite rude. I've seen her be rude, but I've also at some point realized that she can't multitask. She can't work on the
yeah,
computer and talk to someone at the same time. And I just kind of go, okay, I'll just stand here. I know she'll get to me. She just has to finish that. And I think that's important to also go. Just because you show up in the office doesn't mean somebody needs to drop everything immediately. They do
yeah,
need to attend to you in a timely manner. But if they're on the phone with, say, an insurance company or a patient who is crying, that task needs to be finished before they can get to you.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
so I just want to also say Elisa says she needs to log off, which, yeah, we've been talking for a long time. Thanks so much for this amazing discussion.
It's a
Thank
long
you.
conversation. I don't know if we've
It,
covered
it
even
is. No,
half of what
well,
we, you
no, we
know.
are actually, we're moving towards the end here.
Okay.
Um, so in addition to kind of treating your MOA as a person, and the more you get to see them, the more you can do that. Like I used to have an MOA who's retired now, but every visit was partly about spending 15 minutes chatting about movies up front.
Oh yeah,
So yeah, so that and the new one is just not chatty, which is sad.
yeah,
But
yeah.
we also have some recommendations for working the system.
Okay.
And one of my favorite work the system is because in Canada, I don't actually have the email for a lot of my doctors. And for instance, my rheumatologist, her MOA monitors the email and triages it. So I can't reach her directly. I'm kind of envious of all the people in the US who can just email the doctor. But
Yeah. Yeah.
I then made sure at a certain point to get the MOA's email
Yes.
because I can then just email her saying, this is the question, this is what I need from my doctor, and she will pass it on.
Yes.
So you also have a good tip about if you have a question and you're talking to your MOA,
Yeah.
what are some of the best ways to do that?
So, because you're not communicating directly with your doctor, and I can tell you, my doctor got hundreds of emails a day.
Yeah.
And it wasn't just from patients. It's just hundreds of emails with whatever he's dealing with whatever research he's got going on, with
Yeah.
pharmaceutical reps, hundreds of emails a day. So that is why I think it's good for the MOA to do the filtering. So you can
Mhm.
email the MOA your question, and then I will send it on to the doctor. And then when they respond, I can get back to you as the patient.
Mhm.
But I will say, try to condense your question into something short and sweet. It's difficult to do sometimes, but if it's just a question that you just
Mhm.
need an answer to, then try to condense it into one question so that when I
Mhm.
shoot it off to the doctor and he finally sees it out of all the hundreds of emails, he'll be able to answer quickly,
Yeah.
and then I'll be able to get back to you. It doesn't work if I've had a few occasions where somebody has emailed me a question. I forward it on to the doctor responds, I've responded to the question, but then they ask another question on top.
Mm.
So they're questioning the answer. And if this goes back and forth for any length of time, I'm going to say, let's have you come in and talk to the doctor directly.
Yeah.
Let's make an appointment,
Yeah.
because we don't have time to do the third party back and forth all the time, constantly. If it's
Mm.
going to be several questions, if it's going to be several issues that you want to
Mm.
discuss, time to come into the office, make an
Yeah.
appointment,
Yeah.
speak directly to the doctor. There's no third party going on there. There's no
Yeah.
misunderstandings. You won't
Yeah.
miss any information that you need,
Yeah.
you know. And if you're in a flare, if you're actually having a physically bad time, the doctor will be able to see you and
Yeah.
examine you,
Yeah.
right?
Well, and I think it's also important to remember, as part of this, is one of the things I always say is remember that your doctor is your doctor all the time, not just 3, 4 times a year. So that if you are having a flare, or if you're sick and you don't know if you should take your meds, if you're an immunosuppressant, like that's the should I take my immunosuppressant because I have a fever and I'm sick? The answer is that that's short and sweet. That's an email question.
Yeah,
Um, but I'm flaring and nothing I'm doing is helping. That's a I think I need to see the doctor. And most
yeah,
rheumatologists probably all have emergency slots, where there's a deliberate space, probably in every clinic, held for people who are emergency cases.
yeah,
I know my
yeah,
doctor does that. I will be squeezed in if I need to come in for something quick, like for a steroid shot or something. So I think we're back to don't suffer, and make sure that the MOA has, when you call or you email and say, I think I need an appointment, make sure that they know at least the highlights. Like if you feel
yeah,
uncomfortable, like for instance, I once years ago I had some issues that affected my sex life. Let's go there. And I'm kind of like, I really need my rheumatologist, which sounds odd, but it was things like with my neck and stuff. And things were not good at the time. And I'm like, so there I am trying to talk to my MOA about my sex life. You're deeply uncomfortable. But I think there are certain times where you can say, I want to talk about this and the impact on my sex life, and you can say that, and then if they say tell me more, it's like, no, you know what, I like to talk to my doctor about the details. You can do that, but most things your MOA is a trusted resource
yeah,
who has signed confidentiality agreements and probably has heard it all.
yeah,
So
yeah.
be as
But I
open
would,
with them as you feel you can.
yeah, I would say just keep your email questions short and to the point. If
Yes.
you really have more issues to discuss or you have a lot of questions, then
Mhm.
come in. Come in
Yeah.
and talk to the doctor directly and get it straightened out in person,
Yeah.
you know. Yeah.
Well, and as we prepared for this, one of the things Julia said, and I quote, is if it can't be a simple question, it's time to come in.
Yeah.
So, so there you are. Okay, I think we have covered everything on our list, which is as I said, not to say that there isn't more. So if we haven't answered everything or you have questions, please leave them in the comments. And other than that, thank you so much, Julia. This was
All right.
amazing.
Yeah.
I think we answered a lot of questions,
I
and
Yeah, it's a big topic. It's a
it's a
big
very big
conversation. So
topic.
I think, if we can cover as much as we can in a short space
Mm.
of time.
Well,
Yeah.
an hour. It's longer than they recommend most lives should be, but there you are. And if there's a lot of questions we haven't covered, we may do a follow up.
Yeah.
Anyway, thank you so
Okay.
much for
You're
sharing your
welcome.
expertise.
Glad to.
And thank you, those of you who are watching. It was good. All
All
righty.
right.
I'll see you
All
next
right.
time.